Got it.
Okay.
Got it. So we are off and running. Does it seem like this is the fifth week, or does it seem like it's the 12th week or the third week? I like the way that it has come together and where we're ending up, and the sermon topics stayed parallel better than I thought they would. Um, so we will continue with session 5 and monks in the world. Let's have prayer before we begin. Blessed God, we're grateful for the opportunity to set aside time for Lenten disciplines, to focus our minds and hearts to pursue you more fully and know you more fully, and yes, be transformed into likeness more completely. So guide us tonight as we realize the challenge comes by when we try to do this all in the world. So guide us in our understanding and what the Desert Fathers have to say about our being monks in the world. Amen. All right. So this is a quote from Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was in a Catholic monastic order. He was a priest, monk, and he lived in Kentucky at a monastery there. Um, and very interesting. And read some of his stuff and wish I had time to read some more of it, and I probably will someday. But in the meantime, this is one of the things he had to say in a book entitled A Course in Desert Spirituality. So he's the successor by many centuries of these desert fathers living in the Roman Catholic monastic order. He says, but in what sense are the desert fathers and mothers to be imitated? He said, not at all in their exterior actions, impossible to us, not at all suited to our situation, not in all their attitudes. They were extremists. He said they were quite often wrong. Now you think, well, what was wrong with what we studied? Well, I picked out the stuff that wasn't wrong. Okay, some of it is kind of contradictory and interesting, and makes you scratch your head. But he said, with all of his authority, they were often quite wrong. But he says they are to be followed in their faith, their love for Christ, their zeal for the monastic state, and their spirit of prayer and sacrifice. And yeah, we know, and as Diane said, this solitary thing wouldn't be for her. And part of that is personality, but a part of it is just responsibilities and how connected you are and how dependent everybody is on you for what you need or what they need from you. You can't just withdraw from all of that. All kinds of unfortunate foreclosures come about if you do, right? You have these responsibilities to take care of, or pink slips if you don't show up. So we can't imitate their way of life in their external side. But what about having this desert spirituality in the world? Is that something that is possible? So here's a quote from Christine Walters Paintner, who I use a lot. And she talks about the desert mothers and fathers. In the second and third centuries, the desert mothers and fathers sought out wilderness places for simplicity and to fast from their compulsions in service of cultivating greater love for the divine and the world. There's that compassion part we talked about Sunday for God and for the world. One of these elders, you ready for this? Amma Selectia. Amma, Mama. Okay, this is one of the desert mothers. We don't hear from too many of them. There's not many, and this one she had more to say than the others. She has quite a few sayings. Um, and who knows better than an Amma about being a monk in the world, right? We got all the other responsibilities. Who knows better? And she makes it clear that it is our intention rather than our location that makes all the difference. So this is yeah, he said synclectica, synclectica, ama synclectica. There are many, she says, who live in the mountains or the deserts and behave as if they were in town. They're wasting their time. Kind of blunt. It is possible to be a solitary in one's mind while living in a crowd. And it's possible for one who is a solitary to live in the crowd of his own thoughts. Right? So it's not the place, it's more the attitude and the intention of your spiritual pursuit. You pay attention to that in town or in the desert. And just because you're in a desert doesn't mean your mind's not. The Amas and Abbas of the desert knew that simply going off on retreat in silence and solitude does not automatically mean we will find inner stillness. In fact, many seek this kind of experience, and yet their thoughts are filled with chatter and worry and distraction. That's what Diana's talking about. She just would never be able to sit still and still your mind. It's a difficult challenge. Similarly, there are those who live in the cities and who can cultivate a loving presence to each moment, so they find stillness no matter what is happening around them. Or that little island of stillness while the world spins in chaos around them, the eye of the hurricane, and they can sit there in quietness and stillness. We might be tempted to think that if only life could slow down and we could have a period of retreat, then we could cultivate our spiritual life. But our wisdom teachers are clear. The wilderness is right here in our midst, and our invitation is to practice it here and now. You don't have to go anywhere. Find your space in yourself. Does that make sense? Is that more comfortable, or is it still out of reach? Some days better than others. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those cold, snowy days are pretty good for it. When there's leaves to clean up, that's a different story. So we're going to hear some desert sayings on place and attitude and being, practicing desert spirituality wherever you are, wherever you find yourself. Okay, Longinus. One day, Abba Longinus questioned Abba Lucius about three thoughts, saying, first, I want to go into exile. The old man said to him, if you cannot control your tongue, you will not be in exile anywhere. He wanted that adventure. He wanted that experience. But for a specific reason or just in general terms, he was told if he couldn't learn to control his tongue, no matter where you are. Therefore, control your tongue, and you will be in exile. Next, he said to him, I wish to fast. The old man replied, Isaiah said, if you bend your neck like a rope or a bulrush, that is not the fast I will accept, but rather control your evil thoughts. So he's quoting from the book of Isaiah. Kind of fast as the Lord require. That's more Amos, I think. But yeah, it's not always the outward observance, but control your evil thoughts. So I said to him the third time, I wish to flee from men. The old man replied, if you have not first of all lived rightly with men, you will not be able to rightly live in solitude. Okay, so that's your first hill to climb. If you're going to apply all these desert truths, if you're going to apply all the Beatitudes, try it where the rubber meets the road. Try it with a bunch of hard-headed people that don't always give you your way, and you have to learn how to negotiate with. That's where it really comes down to it, right? I mean, it's kind of hard. It's kind of easy to not argue with anybody if you're the only one there.
Yeah, it's what I'm thinking. That's harder to do with people than it is if you're off by yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and they will acknowledge that as we go through these sayings. Um, Matoes says, a brother questioned Abba Matoes, saying, "What am I to do? My tongue makes me suffer, and every time I go among men, I cannot control it." You ever know anybody like that? I'm not certain to say you have that problem. I'm not. Do you know anybody like that? My tongue makes me suffer. Every time I go among men, I cannot control it. But I condemn them and all the good. I commend them and all the good they are doing. No, let me read it. But I condemn them in all the good they are doing, and I reproach them with it. What am I to do? The old man replied, if you cannot contain yourself, flee into solitude, for this is a sickness. He who dwells with brethren not must not be square, but round, so as to turn himself towards all. He went on, it is not through virtue, here it is, it is not through virtue that I live in solitude, but through weakness. Those who live in the midst of men are the strong ones. So here's a monk saying, it's not my strength that lets me pull this off. The strong ones who are the ones who can do this with people where there's challenges. And the saints among you can do it with children. Teachers and parents and my wife. So Pullman, the shepherd, 96. He said that Abba Amanoas said, a man may remain for 100 years in his cell without learning how to live in the cell. You never learn how to calm your mind and do all the things. Even being in a cell is not the trick. Locking yourself in there for 100 years, you can still miss the point. Serenus. They said of Abba Serenus that he used to work hard and always ate 2 small loaves. Abba Joe, his companion, and himself a great ascetic, went to see him and said, I am careful about what I do in the cell, but when I come out, I do as everybody else does. Abba Serenus said to him, there's no great virtue in keeping to your regimen in your cell, but there is if you keep it when you come out of your cell. So, in other words, practice what you preach, what you think you have gained in understanding and awareness. It has to be applied. And so we have the opportunity to do that because we find ourselves confronted with groups and society and families and individuals, friends and enemies and frenemies, all together every day to work it all out. Okay, we did that one. I think. Yeah, that was our Amma. 6. Nysteris. A brother questioned an old man, saying, what good work should I do that I may live? The old man said, God knows what is good. I have heard it said that one of the fathers asked Abba Nysteris the Great, the friend of Abba Anthony, and said to him, what good work is there that I could do? He said to him, are not all actions equal? Scripture says that Abraham was hospitable and God was with him. David was humble and God was with him. Elias loved interior peace, and God was with him. So do whatever you see your soul desires according to God and guard your heart. So it's kind of giving you some space, some creativity, some individuality. You don't have to do exactly what the monks did. But do it according to God and guarding your heart. And 7, Pullman. Back to Pullman. He also said, if Moses had not led his sheep to Midian, you would not have seen him in the bush. I love that one. Used that one before, I think, in class or a sermon or somewhere, maybe Windows. Moses hadn't led his sheep to Midian. You wouldn't have seen him when he was in the bush. In other words, working every day, showing up for work. When he was a lamb himself, working, tending the sheep. He hadn't been there, he would have seen the burning bush. So we might just be in the right place at the right time if we keep our eyes open and guard our hearts and watch for God in those moments. Because God's not confined to the desert. God hasn't moved to the mountains, but is present right on our first step or closer. We keep our eyes open. Well, then we can't finish this part about being a monk in the world without hearing again from the patron saint of monks in the world, the old Eucharistus. Not Eucharistus the Great, no. Eucharistus the secular. Wasn't a monk. He was doing better than a lot of the monks down there at the church. Eucharistus the secular, who said, what did he say? You can quote him. I am a shepherd, and this is my wife, right? And that was simply his life. He lived a life of benevolence, asceticism, chastity, but he did it in secret. It was just, he took care of business. He did what he could where he was. So he has been deemed with all ecclesiastical authority the patron saint amongst in the world. Eucharistus the secular. Well, here we are in the world, and it's time for us to ask the Desert Fathers and Mothers to give us a word. What should we do? How do we become monks in the world? And I'm glad you asked. These are 7 instructions which Moses sent to Abba Pullman. He who puts them in practice will escape all punishment and will live in peace, whether he dwells in the desert or in the midst of brethren. So this sounds like a pretty good list for us. If we just put these things in practice, we can live in peace. Escape all punishment. That wouldn't be bad either, would it? Mm-hmm. Whether we live in the midst of the desert or in the midst of brethren. Okay, number 1, the monk must die to his neighbor and never judge him at all in any way, whatever. If we die to our neighbor, that means we've talked about the humility of that, not taking any offense at what they say about you, good or bad, right? If we die to our neighbor, we also don't judge them, whatever. Then whether we live alone or with people, especially if we live with people, we have to be able to do that. Then we can be all right wherever we are. The monk must die to everything before leaving the body in order not to do harm to anyone. Longfellow talked about dying a piece at a time, lose your things piece at a time. Physical abilities, possessions, you have to release. Eventually, you have to release everything, let everything go to really be able to embrace death and go into death with confidence and peace. It's a little bit of what the Good Friday reflection is talking about. We're going to watch how Jesus does that on the cross. Be reminded of all that he let go of on the cross. And to understand that's what we're called to do, to take up our cross and deny ourselves, to die to the world, and that becomes a freedom to enter into the fullness of God. So that's Good Friday. You have to hear it twice to make it make sense, or maybe more. So you got a head start. If the monk does not, this is number 3, if the monk does not think in his heart that he is a sinner, God will not hear him. Brother said, what does that mean, to think all in his heart that he is a sinner? The old man said, when someone is occupied with his own faults, he does not see those of his neighbor. Number 4, if the man's deeds are not in harmony with his prayer, he labors in vain. The brother said, what is this harmony between practice and prayer? The old man said he should no longer do those things against which he prays. Duh. For when a man gives up his own will, then God is reconciled with him and accepts his prayers. The brother asked, in all the affliction which the monk gives himself, what helps him? The old man said, it is written, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. That's where we find our strength. You don't have to be in a desert to do that, right? You don't have to be in a desert to line up your life with your prayer. That can happen where we are. It's a little bit harder some days, but it can happen where we are. Number 5, the old man was asked, what is the good of fasts and watching, which a man imposes on himself? So vigil fasting. What good is that? And he replied, they make the soul humble. For it is written, consider my affliction and my trouble and forgive all my sins. So if the soul gives itself all this hardship, God will have mercy on us. Okay, so self-discipline, the way of negation, that's not easy to do, but it's progress, right? Number 6, the old man was asked, what should a man do in all the temptations and evil thoughts that come upon him? The old man said, he should weep and implore the goodness of God to come to his aid, and he will obtain peace if he prays with discernment. For it is written, with the Lord on my side, I do not fear. What can man do to me? Okay. And here's another one about dying to yourself. A brother, the last one, a brother asked the old man, here's a man who beats his servant because of a fault he has committed. What will the servant say? The old man said, if the servant is good, he should say, forgive me, for I have sinned. The brother said to him, nothing else? The old man said, no. For from the moment he takes it upon himself the responsibility for the affair, he says, I have sinned. Immediately the Lord will have mercy on him. The aim in all these things is not to judge one's neighbor, for truly, when the hand of the Lord caused all the firstborn in the land of Egypt to die, no house was without its dead. The brother said, what does that mean? The old man said, if we are on the watch to see our own faults, we shall not see those of our neighbor. It is folly for a man who has a dead person in his house to leave him there and go weep over his neighbor's dead. To die to one's neighbor is this, to bear your own faults and not pay attention to anyone else, wondering whether they are good or bad. So there's a lot of group psychology there, social psychology, how to get along with others. And so what are they seeking? Peace. But having peace in here also means having peace with others. And it's where the work is done if we stay in the world, especially. Okay, I've got another quote, and I'm going to turn this on and let it fire up while I'm doing this quote. There we go. This quote's from Edward Sellner, and I don't know where it came from. To be a monk today, or someone seeking to incorporate monastic values and desert spirituality into his or her own life, presumes being part of a community of friends, people with whom a person can share the counsels of the heart and speak a language of the heart to one another. So even these solitary monks came together in communities, in monastic communities, to be with people, to hold them accountable, to give them instructions, corrections when they were wrong about things, to worship together. Community was a big piece of it, even in their solitude for most of them. Some of them remained isolated hermits, never had contact with anybody. We don't hear much from them because they didn't talk to anybody. But what they were learning, they passed on to those who asked the questions. And those who asked the questions remembered them, wrote them down, and we had sayings. So community, as we said on Sunday, there's something about community and love for community that was at the heart of all this movement. It's hard to figure out how that worked together. We've been trying to do that from the sermon through live streams this week, of how to be more loving because of, and think of community because of solitude or because of the pursuit of God. I like that desert saying about the wheel. The closer the lines come to God, they get closer together, or the closer they get together, the closer they bring you to God. That's a pretty good illustration. So community is something about it, and we seek that, and we find that, we benefit from that, and fellowship of the congregation and beyond, but it should be central somewhere for us to do this, especially in the world. Because if we kind of tune in to that kind of connection, it helps minimize the influence of connections that will pull us in different ways and far to the outside of the wheel and from one another and from God. So these communities are important. Lenten studies are important. Worship is important. Fellowship at church is important. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is find more connections like this as I've pursued before the Lenten study, but particularly through working on the Lenten study, pursue more contacts, whether that's books you read or other stuff. So I found this virtual community. Okay, we know what virtual community is by our worship experience here. There are people who do Lenten studies virtually. There are people who worship virtually, attend other meetings virtually. So, well, I never get to do that at St. Luke's other than, disseminate all the services and stuff. So I've been trying this virtual community, spiritual community that is headed by that writer, Christine Walters Painter, that I've quoted so much for several Lenten studies. And so she has a group, it's called the Abbey of the Arts. It's in Ireland. And it's very art and creative centered and focused, writers and poets and dancers and that kind of thing. So it's not a real good fit for me in that way, but they have some pretty good things. And And so she calls this collection the Abbey of the Arts, and then and kind of the subname of it, I guess, is one way to say it, is the Holy Disorder of Dancing Monks. Okay. And one of the elements of it is how to be monks in the world. And she was, in agreement with Merton, who said, we can't do that. And it was her quote from the beginning that, we might be tempted to think if we could just go away, we'd do all right. But the Amas and the Abbas tell us that you don't have to do that. So she has in her group, what's it called? The Monk Manifesto. Okay, so monk is this means singular or solitary. A monk in the world does not live apart, but immersed in every day with a single-hearted and undivided presence, always striving for greater wholeness and integrity. Then manifesto comes from the Latin for clear, means a public declaration of principles and intentions. So she has not 7, she has 8 things about how you can be a monk in the world, right? 1, I commit to finding moments each day for silence and solitude, to make space for another voice to be heard, and to resist a culture of noise and constant stimulation. Okay? I tried to print this, and I can't print it, but I can send the link. So we'll put maybe the link on Windows. Maybe I can post that tomorrow. So that's the first thing. Commit every day, and anybody can do that. Wherever you are, however busy you are, it might mean getting up a few minutes earlier or setting some time aside that you're scrolling on Facebook or whatever else. Set some time aside each day for silence and solitude and contemplative thoughts. Okay? Number 2, I commit to radical acts of hospitality by welcoming the stranger both without and within. I recognize that when I make space inside my heart for the unclaimed parts of myself, I cultivate compassion and the ability to accept those places in others. That's kind of Sunday's sermon. We experience the compassion of God, we tend to get more compassion, or it's not working. That's the outcome that's intended. Number 3, I commit to cultivating community by finding kindred spirits along the path, soul friends with whom I can share my deepest longings, and mentors who can offer guidance and wisdom for the journey. That one gets a little bit harder because you got to make contact. It's not only you who have to make time for that, they have to make time for that. So it's hard to stay connected over time and space with people who have been an important part of your community before. Because communities are always shifting and changing. It's hard to maintain those ties. I commit to cultivating awareness of my kinship with creation, the healthy asceticism by discerning my use of energy and things, letting go what does not help nature to flourish. So it's all creation God had compassion for, not just people. So be mindful of that. I commit to bringing myself fully present to the work I do, whether paid or unpaid, holding a heart of gratitude for the ability to express my gifts in the world in meaningful ways. That means love your work. That's a tall cry for many monks in the world, isn't it? I commit to rhythms of rest and renewal, to the regular practice of Sabbath, and resist a culture of busyness that measures my worth by what I do. But remember, what Abba was it who says, I think Achilles So many take their rest before God gives it. Don't do that. But remember to take it when it's time. I commit to a lifetime of ongoing conversion and transformation, recognizing that I am always on a journey with both gifts and limitations. It's always, I began again, always something new to learn, something new to experience, and new horizons to encounter. I commit to being a dancing monk, cultivating creative joy, letting my body and heart overflow with the inexpressible delights of love. It's a quote from the prologue of the Rule of Benedict. So what do you think of that? You sign up?
Part of it.
Part of it. That's a beginning.
Yeah.
That's a beginning.
Easy to read it than to do it.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's easier to begin. So I guess that's why you just keep beginning. Or maybe it's hard to begin. Maybe it gets easier after you begin. It's that initial jump train. And some people are just wired for that a little bit more. But whatever our wiring system, we can probably all step a little bit closer to an awareness of God and seeking God a little bit more completely and focused in our worship, in our living, in our compassion, and in our work, in our lives, and find more joy there. Well, that's how to be a monk in the world. So we're going to have a closing blessing. And I know that we can't do a recorded music on the Zoom things. So I'll send a link out to this too. And after the blessing, we'll play this music, and it's not profound music, okay? It's this little chorus that has 3 lines of the world is my heart, the world is my home, the world is my monastery, over and over and over. But it's pretty music, and we'll end with that. And I'll send a link out so that people who watch virtually can hear it. It won't be on the recording. But we end with the closing blessing on the community of monks that we are. Okay. God of friendship, we come to know your love and care through the embodied presence of others. Weave us together with kindred spirits, knit us more closely with friends of the soul, cultivate in us a kinship with humanity, so that we recognize our struggles and joys in others. In our loneliness, reveal to us this communion, and may we be a solace to others who ache for connection. Transform us through conversation and loving presence. Help us to see how we are part of a great circle of pilgrims, witnesses, ancestors who guide us to true connection with you. Gather us to your great white heart so we may discover we are never separate, but always held in love. Amen. I hope you've enjoyed the Lenten study, and we'll focus on some of this desert spirituality on Palm Sunday and Good Friday, and I haven't worked on Easter yet. There's a rose that blooms in the desert, and that's interesting. So try to see where that goes, but not tonight. All right, we can end our recording, and I'll send out the link to this. And
Thank you. Bye-bye.